taking time out of your schedules. Really excited to talk with you today about how we can really work together to try to help elect pro-climate action, pro-environment lawmakers in Vermont. And at this session, we really wanted to provide information that for some of you might be really basic and introductory, but knowing that people are at different levels of newness to potentially getting engaged in helping elect climate champions and the kind of work we do. We wanted to make sure that it was accessible to everyone and informative, but then we do also have lots of time for question and answer, discussion, idea sharing. So I know we've got a range of people who might be brand new to this and people who have successfully run for office before. So really looking forward to a conversation at the end where we can learn from each other, get a good sense of what kind of things you all would be interested in potentially working with us on. And if you've got experiences to share about things that campaigns you've engaged in that you found really fun to be involved in and effective and so on, we really want to make the time and space for that. So, so look forward to that. And we're here at this moment knowing that this is the most important election in our lifetimes, which I think some of us have said before, but I don't think any of us could argue, that this is not just a crucial moment. And we also know that connecting directly with voters is the most effective way to win elections. So working together is the way that really us coming together can make a difference and really influence who wins in November, which matters so much. So for those who don't know me, my name is Lauren Hierl. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Conservation Voters, and I've been with VCV for over 6 years now. So have been running campaigns to recruit, train, and then help elect environmental champs. I also do a lot of advocacy work on issues like climate change, clean water, holding polluters accountable, and so on. For those new to VCV, we are a statewide, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We work to elect pro-environment lawmakers. We then advocate for strong environmental laws, and we work to hold lawmakers accountable once they are in office using tools like our environmental scorecard. And we're really working around this vision for Vermont that includes working to advance and defend policies that protect the environment, promote health, while also advancing civil rights, social, racial, and economic justice, and strengthening our democracy. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Shelden Goodwin, who is VCV's Political Outreach Associate. Shelden has experience working on elections as a field organizer with a state political party. She's worked in the Massachusetts and Vermont state houses. She's helped run successful political campaigns for candidates whose values she shares, and has a master's in public policy. We're also joined by Ian Hitchcock, who works as a community organizer for VCV's strategic partner, the Vermont Natural Resources Council. In that role, he works really closely with the state's network of town energy committees. Some representatives here today, which is great to see. And in that role really works to educate and engage Vermonters on our environmental campaigns, helping build the support we need to advance our pro-climate action, pro-environment policy agenda. And Ian had also worked with VCV in 2018, helping run our Canvas operation, organizing phone banking events, and more as we worked to help elect climate champions. So I'll just walk through the agenda quickly, and then we'll get right into the content. And just wanted to note that please use the chat function as we go. As I mentioned, we have lots of time built in for discussion, questions, answers, idea sharing, and so on. But as things come to you, please use that so we can track what's coming to your mind as we're talking, so we can keep it dynamic and engaged, and you can get your thinking down while it's fresh. So in terms of what we'll cover today, so first I'm going to walk through VCV's 2020 election goals, a little bit of context on where we are now and where we hope to be heading into 2021 to set us up for success on our priorities and vision for Vermont. Then Shelden is going to give a brief overview of some of the latest research on the most effective ways to engage voters, especially this year in the time of COVID. And then Ian is going to talk through more details on how people can help connect with voters and some upcoming opportunities to volunteer with VCV so that we can work together to help elect champions who are going to fight for our priorities once elected. And then again, at the end, time for questions, answers, discussion, and really looking forward to hearing from you all on, what kinds of volunteer work you've done, what you found engaging, and might be interested in working on. So now we'll go on to the next slide. Great. So to start with, just wanted to acknowledge that these are, of course, incredibly unusual times. So there are some things not part of this presentation that you would normally see, like knocking on doors is like the #1 thing you can do to connect with voters. But this year, we are not organizing a campaign. I don't want someone showing up to my door that I don't know at this moment. So we're focusing on things that people can do that are safe and using our socially distanced best practices and all that. So just wanted to acknowledge that, we're not hosting house parties at people's homes and things like that. So really looking at what we can do together in these unusual times. And also wanted to acknowledge that, there's some other unusual dynamics with the elections this year. We're seeing a big push for people to request early ballots. So I'm sure many of you have seen some of the news reports. More people have already requested an early ballot than voted in all of the 2018 primary through any means. So we're seeing a lot of engagement already. And there was legislation passed this spring that authorized the Secretary of State to proactively mail ballots to every voter for the November election. So, everything we're talking about, we're doing stuff this summer, but also, of course, the fall is going to be critically important. And so, we're going to be anticipating an increase in turnout and people voting earlier than usual because of this, the mail-in voting that we're going to be seeing. So, we're working to stay on top of these kind of changing dynamics in these unusual times. So wanted to acknowledge that. And we know that this year's elections, as I said before, are critically important for the kind of future we're going to have in Vermont. And of course, that's true nationally and in the, everything from the presidential to US Congress and Senate. But we also know that right here in Vermont, the work that we can do together can really change the lives of all of us here in Vermont. And so, we work on policies at the State House that really impacts all of us, our neighbors, our communities. And we know, time and again that Vermont can set an example of the kinds of policies that can work. We can kind of be proof of concept, that laboratory for democracy. And these are the kinds of things we need to be doing, knowing how urgent climate action, clean water, holding polluters accountable, all these big issues that we're working on. And so, the state level work, I know there's a lot of great work happening with things like Sister District and Swing Left, and some ways people are engaging with national campaigns, which is awesome. And just, emphasizing the local importance of our races as well. And so this year we are really working right now on a program to help elect a true pro-climate action supermajority for the next legislative biennium. So this is going to be one of our top priorities for this year. And, in 2018, we worked really hard to support a slate of pro-environment candidates. And this included both incumbent allies that were in really tough races, as well as flipping seats from anti to pro-environment. And we saw a lot of success. We did a lot of work connecting with voters in 13 priority districts, some of these hardest races to win, and 11 of those were the key races that either stayed pro-environment in really tough races or flipped to pro-environment seats. And we've seen this play out in really meaningful ways this year. For example, I'm sure a lot of you have been following the Global Warming Solutions Act, which has been our top climate action priority this year, setting accountability and for our state to actually hit our climate targets and setting up a process for how we're going to do that. And in the House in February, we got 105 votes in support of that. And you need 100 votes to override a gubernatorial veto. And we were looking at what were those seats that were the key difference that got us over, and could directly see that the work we had done had made a difference to getting over that threshold. And in committee, Governor Scott has expressed concern about the bill. And knowing that there's veto-proof majorities on the other end totally changes that dynamic. And the bill is still pending further action in August, but having that kind of vote really is going to determine whether or not this bill becomes law. We've seen other examples, like I'm sure you're all watching the paid family leave, where they fell one vote shy of that override vote of another veto by Governor Scott. There was also another bill that VCV supported to hold toxic polluters accountable that Governor Scott vetoed, and they haven't yet voted on whether or not to override that veto. And frankly, it's because it's been really challenging for them to hit that supermajority threshold, 20 votes in the Senate, 100 votes in the House. And this is where just having the numbers and having people in office and having that supermajority, we really see it come into play in the issues we're working on day in and day out at the State House. So that's why this is a huge focus of ours for the year. The next thing we have on here is making climate action a winning issue this election. And we really see the importance of making our issues winning electoral campaign issues, where people who are fresh off the campaign trail are coming into the State House and really feel compelled to prioritize and call on leadership to take bold climate action and to show up and say, this is what my voters were calling on me to do, and I need to follow through. And looking back over the last couple election cycles in Vermont, it's really been pretty stark to see how different those election dynamics can play out into what kind of policy action we can see. So for example, in 2016, we saw a big fossil fuel industry funded anti-carbon tax push during election season. It was aggressive tactics. There was mail, radio, a lot of attacks on candidates. And it really created a kind of feeling when lawmakers came in, even though it didn't really result in a net loss of seats or anything in the legislature, but people just came in kind of nervous that if they were supporting climate action, that they were going to get attacked. And that's a really uncomfortable feeling for people. And so it was really hard to get momentum for really any kind of climate action, even if it was not any kind of carbon pricing, because there was just this general sense of of fear that people are going to come after you if you're taking any kind of climate action. And conversely, in the 2018 elections, we worked really hard with a lot of Vermont activists, some of you, to make sure that we were actively, loudly calling for climate action during election season. All of the work that VCV was doing, through a variety of tactics for reaching voters, we were using very explicitly pro-climate action, pro-environment messaging. And this was in, again, the tough districts, so moderate districts, swing districts, rural, all parts of the state. And when we saw such great success of people being elected with that message front and center in those districts, it really opened up possibilities and changed how these issues were prioritized. And this legislative session, we've really seen leadership prioritize clean water and climate action. The past 2 years, those were in the top handful of things that they were really focused on getting across the finish line. And so going into 2020, we really want to ensure, or the 2020 elections and then the next biennium, we want to be ensuring that the work that we can do as climate activists and people who care deeply about these issues is creating that same sense of urgency, momentum, and support from voters. So when people come into the legislature, they feel emboldened and empowered and not, nervous about supporting bold climate action of the kind that we need. And so, our third goal, engaging environmental activists. we know that working together, we've seen it with activism at the State House on climate that has been amazing and really powerful and impactful. And that, again, the need to be doing that during election season is critical too. So I'm going to now turn it over to Shelden to talk more about the specific tactics that we can use to connect with voters.
Thanks, Lauren. So first I'm going to talk about some ideas about organizing and why that is important. So now that we've kind of shared the dynamics going into this election and some of VCV's goals, I want to talk about why we need you. This image on the screen kind of illustrates the power of organizing. When we all come together, we can defeat what seems like impossible odds. And as we transition to talking more about some direct voter tactics we plan to use this year, I wanted to share a brief story about why every vote counts. We've seen in Vermont that elections are won a lot of the times on margins that are very small, and that was very evident in 2018 in Mike McCarthy's race in St. Albans. McCarthy lost his race in 2016 by only 70 votes and won his race in 2018 by only 32 votes. And I had the opportunity to help on McCarthy's race in 2018. And I'm sure that all the late nights calling voters by him and his volunteers and knocking on doors in the cold and snow had a big impact on his win.
One day I get to nap. You turn that flag up there. Huh?
We need everyone to please mute.
Oh, shit.
It's all good. No, we just ask folks to please, mute themselves as they come on. We're all doing this COVID digital thing together.
Totally fine. Sorry, I lost my spot. So on the race, we saw their very close margins, and we saw that every vote in voter conversation mattered. And here in Vermont, we've seen races literally run by one vote in recent years, and many won by just a dozen of voters. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about research behind some of the tactics that we plan to use this year. So the first tactic I'm going to talk about is phone banking. And phone banking is when a volunteer or organizer calls a potential voter to either survey them to identify potential supporters, persuade them to vote for a particular candidate, or encourage the person to vote in the election. We found in recent years that robocalls are basically worthless and possibly even harmful for a candidate's chances, because you probably know people get so many spam calls that hearing another one is not very helpful of persuading anyone. But phone calls by real people can increase turnout by approximately 2 to 3% because having real conversations matters. And we've seen this research over decades-long research to show that this is true. And even though 2 to 3% might seem small in a tight election like we just talked about, it can make a difference between a win and a loss. Also, phone banking is also a key mechanism to clean lists, figure out who still lives there, and identify and categorize voters. If you ever phone bank before, you know that you get a lot of people not home or wrong numbers. All those wrong numbers that you identify help to make phone calls more efficient in the future and help campaigns reach more people. Phone banking is the most efficient way that we have to have conversations with voters in this climate, especially when we can't talk to people face to face. So now I'm going to talk about text banking. So when I'm talking about texting, I'm talking about relational texting, which is a type of texting, which means not like the mass text you might get from like a 5-digit number. Relational texting allows volunteers and organizers to use a platform to text a lot of people, but also be able to have back and forth conversations with potential voters. So you're actually able to have conversations via text versus just mass communication. This is one of the newer ways we have to connect with people and fits with our more modern sense of communication. While emails and phone calls have a declining open and answer rate, these days folks open over 90% of the text messages they receive, especially true for younger voters who are more likely to screen their calls. Research has shown that text messaging increases voter turnout between 0.5% and 1.5%. This is less effective than we see with phone banking, though this research is more new. But texting, you're able to reach a lot more people quickly, so you can have a potential impact on a larger pool of voters than you might have phone banking. And now I'm going to speak briefly about handwritten postcards and letters. So writing postcards or letters to voters can be a fun supplement to phone banking and text banking, especially if folks are not able to make calls or text bank. There's not a lot of research on the effectiveness of handwritten postcards and letters, but they have shown to increase turnout by 1 to 3% in some races. But because postcard writing takes a lot more time than a phone call or a text, you can reach a lot fewer voters. This is not a preferred method of reaching voters because, again, we want to be able to have actual conversations with people, and postcards are really a one-way communication, but they're definitely more likely to be read and taken in by people if it's handwritten that they know as a neighbor or someone that lives in their community versus just a postcard that doesn't have that personal touch to it. But our focus for this election cycle is to talk to as many Vermonters as possible. So postcard writing is one of our lower priority tactics, but we still plan to. So now I'm going to hand it over to Ian.
Thank you, Sheldon. And I will just give folks another reminder, if they can, to please mute themselves as they join on. So how can you, this session, help both, VCV and pro-environmental champions really put in practice some of the great research that Sheldon has shown us? So I don't think it's going to be any surprise to you folks that we are going to employ the very same tactics that Sheldon just walked us through. So the first one will be phone banking. So when phone banking with VCV, we will provide folks with a list of voters to contact, training and a script, and as well as backgrounds on the candidates we'll be discussing. We're going to be employing these tactics in a wide variety of different races in support of a wide variety of different candidates who all have demonstrated support for environmental issues. And we're going to make sure that you have whatever context you need about to talk and actually have an informed conversation with voters about this candidate and why supporting them is important. And also for folks who haven't been involved with phone banking before, we are more than happy to work with you and provide kind of any training and support we can offer to make sure that the experience is as comfortable and fun as possible. And we will also provide training and the ability to track your data. So as Sheldon mentioned, in addition to actually reaching voters this year and encouraging them to vote at all or vote ideally for environmental candidates, one of the other key but more subtle benefits of phone banking is getting a sense of data of kind of what people's voting patterns and behaviors are. Because as Sheldon mentioned, really elections can swing by incredibly small margins, particularly at the local level. So every bit of individual outreach really does have the potential to make a difference. And if we know kind of how people feel about voting or what their attitudes are about a candidate, it is much easier for us to be more efficient with our time and make sure that we are doing everything we can to bring our people out to vote, to ensure that the environmental vote for any given candidate is strong and resounding, so that that candidate can be over the finish line. So even if a phone call doesn't necessarily result in a firm commitment from someone to vote for a candidate, it is still incredibly valuable and useful, not only for this election cycle, but to make sure that we are planning and have good information going forward. Especially in a state as small as Vermont, we really do have a lot of potential here to have really strong and really robust ways to ensure that folks who care about environmental issues and social justice issues generally are being kept informed about what candidates they support and why. So our ask from you as someone participating in a phone bank would obviously be your time. We were not be able to provide phones, so we would ask folks to be using their personal phones for these calls. We'd be asking for you to keep track of the kind of results of those calls, whether folks answered, how they responded to the content. And again, we would talk through that. And persistence, this is an important point. because having done more than my fair share of kind of phone banks and canvases, I know that sometimes, when you get a lot of answering machines, or you get a lot of busy signals, or you're calling right around dinner and nobody's picking up, it can feel a little discouraging sometimes. But please stick with it and know that, any call that doesn't get answered, that's not our one bite at the apple. We would be cycling folks through to make sure that we're trying to reach as many people as possible. And when you do have a great conversation with someone who really appreciates knowing that someone cared enough to ensure that they were informed about with the power their vote could have on a local level, I found that A, folks really appreciate that, and B, it is such a good feeling to know that you are doing what you can in a time that is just so important, as Lauren mentioned, to really be making a tangible difference, which I know is a very difficult thing to do in this era of social distancing, when so many of the traditional things we'd want to do or the ways we want to show up to our communities aren't available or safe. So, I would hope that folks would be able to persist and be sustained by the notion that they really are getting involved in trying to help change their communities for the better through these tools. So the next tactic, as Shelden mentioned, would be text banking. So for this, we would be using a bit of software that is new to us called Fruit Text, which is a web-based platform. So folks would be logging on with their computers through a browser that we would provide folks a link to and information on. And similarly to the phone banking, we provide sample messages, context for candidates, and just making sure that people have the prompts to engage in a conversation in a way that feels kind of both authentic and informed. So like the phone banking, we'd obviously be asking for your time. Folks would need to have a computer with internet access. Adaptability, that is a skill that I think we are all learning to practice in these COVID times. But just kind of knowing that, we're learning how to use this software, and, there may be, issues that come up. Just, please communicate with us as things happen, and we'll happily help you work through them. And again, that persistence, it can sometimes feel like a bit of a grind, but it really is worth it. Even if someone doesn't respond to a message, even seeing a message, reminding them about the importance of exercising their right to vote and the opportunity they have to do so, can be really impactful, even if you don't necessarily see that impact if someone doesn't choose to respond to the text. And then finally, as Shelden mentioned, we're going to put a little bit less emphasis on postcard writing, but it is definitely an opportunity if folks are kind of unable or unwilling to do phone banking or text banking. So we would provide folks with some blank postcards, again, lists of voters and addresses to contact, and some sample language and talking points. And from you, we would need obviously your time and preferably your good handwriting, so folks can read the postcards as they come through. So the primary is coming right up. August 11th is primary day in Vermont, but it's important to note that early voting is already underway. So folks can be casting ballots right now at any moment. So any conversation we have with any voters between now and the primary day could really be essential in making sure that they cast that ballot, and that they're able to cast that ballot in an informed way. So we really are at a key moment and a key time where we could use all of your help to help reach as many of those folks as possible. And I would just want to emphasize, to Sheldon's point with the story of the Mike McCarthy race as an example, like if everyone on this call contacted, even only like 5 or 7 people over the course between now and the primary, we would be within like what the margin of victory was for that candidate. So I just want folks to, even though we may be small, because Vermont is also small, we can be mighty. And we would encourage all of your help to do that. So we've got a couple of upcoming opportunities geared around the primary that we want to make sure folks are aware of. The first is that we'll be hosting a text bank in the evening on August 7th, another text bank the following afternoon of August 8th, and then the day before the primary, we'll be doing an evening phone bank, encouraging folks to get out the vote. So please stay tuned for more information on the specifics of that, and get in touch with Shelden or myself to ensure that you can get signed up. But we would love to be able to apply this research, to apply kind of your time and passions and skills, and really work together to try to make sure that we can ensure that this incredibly important election is one that sets us up to create a more thriving and just Vermont. So with that, I will turn it back over to Shelden.
Great, thanks, Ian. Now we just have some time for some question and answer, and also kind of idea sharing and people talking about maybe their experience with some of these tactics and the like. So feel free to either put your thoughts in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, you are able to do that as well.
Hi, my name is Linda Gravel. I'm the Washington County Chair. I have done phone banking and texting and postcards. And I think they're all an opportunity to reach the voters. I've used through text, it is very easy to use. So I encourage people to try the texting if they are too shy to talk directly with the voter. You can sort of do it on your own time over the course of like a day or two. I'm personally interested in the data you have on candidates that are interested in voting for climate change bills. From my point of view, I can reach a lot of voters and give them information about the candidates and kind of convince them that it's a good idea to vote for candidates that are supporting our climate bills. So could you talk briefly about your list of candidates? Thank you.
Yeah, I think Lauren can kind of speak to that, but too, so we have endorsed some candidates for the primary for the State House and State Senate, and are looking to endorse a lot more candidates going into the general election. So far, we've only endorsed candidates who have competitive primaries on August 11th, kind of prioritizing those races first. But we're, after the primary, going to be endorsing a lot more candidates. And that information, of course, is publicly available on our website of the list of candidates that we've endorsed and going to be supporting. Maybe, Lauren, you can speak a little more to the candidates that we are supporting.
Yeah. So I just put a link in to the VCV website where we have an elections page that has some basic information about voting and accessing the polls. And on there, you can kind of see the explanation for, the process that we use to endorse candidates, which includes for incumbents, a big piece of it is looking at voting records, co-sponsorship of bills. We work with these people in the State House, so we, have a really good sense of what actions people are taking on our priorities in that role. So for incumbents, that really is the key factors that we're looking at. And for new candidates, we have a candidate questionnaire, which if anyone's interested in seeing it, happy to share that as well to see the kinds of questions we are asking people. We also do an environmental scorecard. So even though we so far, which I'll put a link to right here too. So there's a digital one available right now that is updated with the votes that have happened so far through 2020. We usually do a hard copy one as well, but with the legislature still not quite adjourned, we're kind of figuring out if we're just gonna put one out, knowing there might be some other important votes that we might want to include. But you can right now look on there and see what the environmental voting records are of candidates across the state. So that's every single senator and representative. So a lot more people than the kind of small initial list of folks that we endorsed. Because so far, as I think Shelden mentioned, we've just done candidates that are in competitive primaries for this August 11th, and we're continuing to look at candidates, and we're going to be rolling out more, quite a few more endorsements in the coming weeks. And so it's not at all a complete list; it's just an initial list. So yeah, so. Don had the question about that. Yeah, so everyone who is on that first website, our elections website, those are people in competitive primaries, and there's there's still pending statewide endorsements, and we'll endorse in quite a few legislative races. So really the scorecard, if you see that nobody from your district is yet, part of that elections list, then the scorecard might be more informative at this point for incumbents at least. And then we'll be getting out the other endorsements in the, next month or so.
Great, thank you, Lauren. So there was a question from Jake about the strategies as they relate to age. And there is research related to what strategies work better with different age groups, with trying to reach younger voters and more through texting, and also using more social ads and things like that where people are. I think what we've learned in the overall research is just trying to reach voters where voters already are. So if people are already on certain platforms, already using certain things, trying to reach people where they are versus having them have to come to us. And from that, in terms of trying to engage younger voters, I think that's always a priority for us, as well as other groups in Vermont. I know that we have some plans to partner with different enviro groups to try to make sure that younger voters are engaged and understand how to vote by mail, especially this year, where we know that it can be harder for younger voters to vote by mail because they move more often and have to update addresses and things like that, which can make it more challenging to vote by mail. So that is definitely part of our strategy for November. I'm
sorry, Sheldon, if I could just briefly add to that, particularly on the point of reaching younger voters. So we partnered with some UVM students this last college semester to do a project around exactly that question, to ask them to basically survey their peers, hold voter registration drives, and this was on UVM's campus, and try to help us identify kind of what were some of the common barriers that kept young people from voting, and what were some of the things that encouraged young people to vote. And we found through that research that a lot of young folks didn't necessarily feel the same attachment to the places they were in, and this was just the college environment, but in terms of feeling like they could vote in local elections, because many of them were from other places and didn't necessarily think of this place as home. But we very much plan to continue partnering with groups like that and those students to really encourage that sort of peer-to-peer outreach, because the key take from the lesson there was that it isn't so much more effective for people to be hearing from their peers than maybe to be hearing from those of us who are representatives of larger groups. So I think that also speaks to why all of your involvement is so important, because in any kind of voter contact or outreach that you do, you all are speaking on a very kind of peer-to-peer, neighbor-to-neighbor level, which I think folks tend to be much more receptive to regardless of age.
Great, thank you, Ian. And then we had a question from Linda. Is it helpful for someone from, say, Windsor County to be calling about a race in another county? And I would say yes. Of course, it's always more helpful if you're able to make that personal neighborly connection, but we're all still living in Vermont, so it's not that much of a difference from county to county. We still have a lot in common and be able to answer questions that people might have. So yes, it is helpful to call about places in other races. Of course, it's always preferred for people who live in the same place to be calling about that place, but it is still helpful to call people in other places. And let's see, there was a question from Don, and I think they might have been answered, but so yes, all the candidates we've endorsed so far have primaries. And we have not endorsed in the gubernatorial or lieutenant governor races as of yet. There's a possibility that we might, but as of right now, we have not. And how would willing volunteers sign up to help? I posted in the chat the volunteer form that's on our website that you can fill out to get involved. I can reach out to you about setting up a time to volunteer. And Rebecca asked, do you feel that voting in person is safer as far as ballot safety across the country? So voting by mail has been proven to be safe and effective in other places. If you go on our website, we actually did a whole webinar with the League of Conservation Voters Oregon's political director, where they've had vote by mail for a long time and have seen it to be a safe method for people to vote. It's also a possibility for people to vote in person, especially if they have disabilities or have special needs that need to be helped in person, that's also going to be an option. Also, if they just decide to vote late and they don't have time to get a ballot in time to mail it back, there's also still going to be the in-person option with lots of PPE available so that people can be safe and vote. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but hopefully.
I would just add to that briefly. I mean, I know that there is a lot of work that the city clerks alongside the Secretary of State's office are doing to, look at protocols for how the in-person voting is actually going to happen with, maintaining distance, requiring masks, hand sanitizer, like the basic things. So, obviously I think it's still gathering in person compared to voting from home, but I know people are working hard to try to make it as safe and accessible. So nobody is hampered from casting their vote this year, but there's multiple options. So just wanted to note that as well.
Yep, thank you, Lauren. And so there's another question from Jake. Will you be helping us understand where the priority races are to help elect the supermajority? And yes, if you volunteer with us, we're going to be kind of helping you to point you towards the places where you can help us the most and where our priorities are, by giving you the contact information and the races that are most important, where we feel like we can have the most impact of the people that we endorsed. So yes. And from Don.
I would just add to that as well. So, when we are doing events, it is for specific candidates. So you might live somewhere and, to Linda's question of someone, we might be asking you to call or text into a different district than your own, because that is the higher priority race where it's, a tougher district, a more competitive race. So that is exactly the analysis that we are doing of trying to prioritize your time on where it is most likely to be most impactful and most needed. There's a lot of races across the state where, we already have a very good idea who's going to win, or there's not even a challenger. So we want to make sure that your time is really well spent and really effective in the places that need it most. So that's where we would be asking people to focus their time and efforts in volunteering with us.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. And then from Don, he asked about the effectiveness of signs on your front lawn and honking waves compared to these other tactics. And I would say that the research really shows that in low information races, or like really local races, like a mayor's race or like very small races, those things can make a difference because it's just name recognition and the like. But for bigger races like state rep, state senate, where people can have more access to information, where they don't really need to just see names, they're going to hear about it from multiple places, it's more effective to have conversations with people. And so any types of forms of conversation having is more important than necessarily the name recognition, because people already know the names of the candidates. So it's less important in that sense. I don't know if that answers the question, but I hope it does. And then we had a question from Linda. How are your list of voters to contact compiled? So the list of voters comes from the voter file. When you register to vote, you provide your town clerk with information about you, and that allows candidates and also groups like ours to reach out to you. And so from that, we kind of try to prioritize people who we think are more likely to vote for pro-environmental candidates, and trying to convince them first about our candidates that we've endorsed. So that's kind of how we prioritize, is by trying to reach people who we think will vote on our issues. It's also been shown by the Environmental Voter Project that a lot of people who consider themselves environmentalists and care about environmental issues don't vote because they are not engaged in the electoral process. And so I think it's also important for groups like ours to engage those voters. So that's kind of how we compile our list of voters.
And just to briefly add on to that point, Shelden, essentially we strongly believe that one of the most powerful and impactful ways that ordinary people can affect political change is by engaging in the political process, particularly in their local elections. Again, because those victory votes are those margins of victory can be so small. And so many of the like most impactful pieces of legislation really come down to like very, very close margins in the legislature. So having even one or two more positive votes is really fantastic. And then something else that I've just noticed in observing the dynamic of the legislature, particularly around environmental issues, has been the importance of champions, right? So not just having consistent people who vote the right way, but people who really, on key committees, as legislation is being developed, as policies are being discussed, really, dig their teeth into, the serious issues and help bring along their colleagues and form coalitions and do the hard work that's needed to really champion powerful legislation through the finish line, rather than just being a great vote. And so that too is part of what we think about when we're thinking about who we want to elect and who we want to spend our time and your volunteer time supporting.
Great, thanks, Ian. Maybe Lauren can answer this other question from Don about the pension fund.
Yeah, so divestment. So that's an issue that, Vermont advocacy groups have been pushing on for years unsuccessfully for the state pension fund, unfortunately. So this was something that, for VCV, we had worked on. I remember spending hours in meetings with the treasurer and some of the pension boards talking about these issues a couple years ago, and it has really been stalled out, unfortunately. And, I think right now the economics of the oil and gas industry have opened up a new opportunity to reprioritize that for the state of Vermont. So, this past year, we've really been focusing on a suite of policy initiatives like the Global Warming Solutions Act I mentioned, as well as a couple other legislative initiatives. It's an unusual year because the legislature is still coming back in August, but we are looking at, what are we going to be spending the next year on? And, divestment, given, I feel like a renewed opportunity to make progress on it, despite it being stalled out in recent years. So let's keep talking, Don. I'm so glad.
Can I say something? Can I say something about it? Can I say something about it?
Sure.
Beth Pierce is, my information is that Beth Pierce has refused to divest, and she's used her position in a very powerful way. Is there any alternative to Beth Pierce?
Beth does have an opponent, although it's a woman, Carolyn Brannigan, who's running against her, who I don't know this for sure. I haven't seen her position on divestment, but I don't imagine it would be more pro-divestment than Beth is. I would say, we have had challenges with this. A few years ago, we did not endorse Beth Pierce because of this issue. But we have in the last couple of years, so she tries to use her position, which I think people could argue the effectiveness of kind of the shareholder strategy of, get in the room with some of the executives from some of these companies, and has done a lot of other ways of trying to improve the kind of environmental criteria around our pensions and so on. She has really been an ally and advocate on clean water funding. This has been a huge issue for the state of Vermont, of course, in recent years, and she was a real leader on that issue, I would say, and has actually been really active on the Global Warming Solutions Act, testifying in support, making the economic case in a way that, right now I think is critical of, how does this kind of climate economy actually help get us out of the crisis we're in a way that makes us more resilient, creates jobs, and is actually, making our economy more resilient and stronger coming out of it. So, I think it's a totally fair criticism that Treasurer Pierce has not been a supporter of divestment, and I think we need to keep pushing on that. I did just want to note some other areas that I have worked with Treasurer Pierce on. So I think we need to keep fighting it, though, and we need to keep pushing on her and hope we can change that dynamic.
I hope we can come up with some effective strategies to push on her. I would just find her position as intolerable.
Yeah, I think we need to keep keep fighting for this. And I do think that, you know, the economic case right now, it's kind of unconscionable to not get out right now for a whole host of reasons. So I'm glad people are talking about this. Are there other?
So there was a question from Kimberly about environmental staff people on town staff, and I'm not aware of that being a common thing in towns. Maybe Ian might have a little more information since he's worked with town energy committees, but that seems to be a novel idea to me, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to what I know of. So as Shelden mentioned, you know, I don't know that there are necessarily a lot of, you know, municipal level staffers who are, you know, solely environmentally focused, maybe in the way the question is describing. I will say that, you know, many of the network of town energy committees that exist around the state are essentially subcommittees of the select board. So in that sense, they have kind of official municipal standing, I suppose, although they tend to be more kind of advisory committees than committees that actually have their own kind of budgets or funding. Now, that isn't always true. Like the Montpelier Energy Action Committee is a great example of one that actually has some funding from revolving loan fund. It's been able to use that to invest in, you know, energy savings projects like some upgrades in the wastewater treatment plant. So in addition, I know in, you know, the community of Hartford, Vermont, there is actually an energy coordinator as part of the town's planning department who really has been instrumental in helping pull a lot of great projects together in that town. So it is present in some places. I don't know how widespread it is. And I also know it can be difficult for, you know, particularly smaller municipalities without a lot of, you know, resources to draw on to kind of create new positions or positions that are solely devoted to these sorts of issues. That said, you know, regional planning commissions on a regional level are, you know, starting to enter into the kind of energy space in particular. And I think there is more opportunity there for kind of collaboration and, you know, ways to get folks involved on that level. The other thing I would note is that, you know, the Global Warming Solutions Act really does provide an interesting framework if it does go into law for, you know, how do we think about how we actually implement the policies we need on the ground, on the very local level, to make our climate goals, you know, worth more than the paper they're printed on. And so, you know, I think there are opportunities there, although I'm unaware of how those would play into, you know, something like our local electoral work this year at this moment. And again, I know more about kind of the climate and energy space than other environmental issues. So, you know, it may very well be true that on things like, you know, water or planning, that there are in fact more, you know, staff focused on that I just am not necessarily aware of.
Linda, did you have a comment?
This is Linda Gray, and I can just chime in a few other details. I know that Brattleboro has an energy coordinator, and in addition to Hartford having one, and in the Upper Valley area, there's a group of, I think it's now 6 towns that they're relatively small towns and have drawn together, working with the Regional Planning Commission as the entity that will hire a shared energy coordinator. So somebody whose mission is to do that, but shared among 6 towns.
Great. So we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions if anyone has them before we wrap up.
I did just want to note, I was just looking up because this is when the scorecards can be really useful. So the candidate running against Beth Pierce actually took a vote a couple of years ago as a state representative on fossil fuel divestment for the state, and she voted against it. So, you know, I would say my recommendation would be that you know, we're probably going to support Beth Pierce, but then be pushing hard to fight for her to change her position on divestment. I think it would be even harder, her opponent. So I just wanted to share that voting record. I think it was a pretty strong vote. So she was kind of very much in the minority voting against that resolution.
Can you just explain divestment for those who don't know it?
Don, do you want to take that one? I don't know if Don's available.
Yes. Who asked? That was
Rebecca.
Rebecca. Our state teachers and our state workers have in their contracts, the state provides pension funds for them when they retire after 30 years. And there's a wad of money that's a big wad. It's an endowment in essence. And in the case of South Africa and in the case of cigarettes, we decided as a state to get our money out of stocks that, in the case of South Africa in 1985, in order to be on the right side of the anti-apartheid movement, we said any company doing business with South Africa shouldn't be in our portfolio of state worker and teacher stocks. And we divested, and it worked. It was amazing that they asked the legislature each year to monitor how much money this dopey do-gooderism had cost the state. And in fact, it turned out that the divested portfolio did better than the control.
Wow.
A number of years. So that was very cool. And we got Mandela out of jail and free South Africa. A big accomplishment.
Wow. Awesome. Thank you. That helps a lot.
That's all right. And right now, this is a great time with oil, with such an oil glut, and you can tell it by the price at the pump, that oil stocks are going to be stranded assets in about 5 years when we're all driving electric. And this is be a great time to get rid of them out of our portfolio. Thank you.
Yep. Wonderful. Thank you, Don.
Yes, you're welcome.
Well, it seems like we are at our time for the webinar. If you have more questions, feel free to reach out to me or to Lauren or to Ian, and we would be happy to answer them. Thank you so much for coming and participating. I look forward to working with a lot of you this election cycle.
Thank you all very much. It was so helpful, so helpful.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming today.
Bye.
Care.
Thanks.